Let's move to the variations. So the goal for the variation stage is to find the, you guessed it, variations in the dark areas of the pictures, not just flat uniform tones. And we want to look for things to darken first of all, I think. So we can, rather than reduce the contrast by lightening things, we can push the contrast to even more emphasize the form and the three-dimensional impact of the image, let's say. So here I'm looking for the light shape in the hair. It's just giving us the impression of a little bit of a light shape hitting right there. We don't want it too clear or sharp, we just want it to be legible, let's say. I'm just going to soften the front edge a little bit so it's not too graphic and shapy. I'm just going to make some kind of transition over here on the head, so it's a bit of modeling on this hair as well, since we don't really like it being very flat like that. Here I'm honestly just looking at the reference and seeing like how the hair sort of behaves. We can look for certain shapes in the hair that we see actually, these streakier bits that sort of come down. Since we have these sort of shining areas, and then those shinier clumps will be leaving us some darker streaks of shadow or darker halftone alongside those shinier areas. So I feel like the head is a little too large again, so perhaps I pushed it around a little bit where I brushed it, or maybe I just didn't reduce it enough. Now sort of having more information, it was starting to look a little bit too large to my eye again, so maybe the top of the head was a little bit too much. Could be we could still sort of slightly round this off. At this point it's like a visual comparison, it's not really something I measure at this point. For you, of course, I recommend in the drawing stage, in the construct stage that is, and all the subsequent stages where you still have the plumb line, I recommend you keep measuring. And without the plumb line you can still measure things you already have on the paper, like how wide is the head versus the pelvis, for example, and see if that same measurement adds up on the figure. We lost a little bit of the darks in many places, I feel like, so I'm probably just gonna have to give those a pass again. That's normal, part of the process, honestly. Here I'm not really looking to render things, more so just create something that is feeling somewhat believable, Perhaps we could actually push this light shape a little bit further to the right here. As you can see, it's not taking off a crazy amount of graphite with this hard eraser. So we had to really press to find those lighter things. I think we can push the lightness a little bit around the edge here, so it sort of becomes a little bit more hair-like and airy, a softer edge. So it feels more like light is hitting that area, so it creates a sort of softer effect. At least that's what it feels like to me. Perhaps we can further push the value a little bit here. Doing this, I just try to look at it from slightly more angles than usual, so I can actually make sure it's not starting to pop out of there as a shiny mess, you know. So yeah, I guess that would be sort of voluminous enough, perhaps, for the variation stage just as a form. I sort of went over this with a kind of big form modeling pass first, just trying to find this sort of light shape in here initially, and then next I think I'll just pull some of those sort of highlights to be kind of placeholders. I want to kind of create shapes with these. We don't really want to, you know, try to put in strands of hair, and this actually picked up a little bit too much. So I'll just color those back in real quick. Okay, perhaps let's just leave it at that for now. I'm feeling we can further push the darks, maybe on there a little bit, but we can still sort of refine and figure this hair stuff out in the rendering of the darks phase, which is the sort of finishing stage. So let's just move forward. Here I am looking for the separation between the cast shadow on her back and the hair. The cast shadow is actually really quite dark, especially in these places where there's barely any light reaching. As we get lower, the value difference sort of starts to get a little bit less obvious. I think this edge actually is pretty good by itself right now, but let's just soften that a little bit so it's not extremely obvious. You can actually go in and perhaps soften this shadow a little bit overall. I'm not really doing this to push it into the grain. I'm sort of using the stubby brush as a tool to soften the edges a little bit, so hopefully a bit less work in the rendering stage. In between here, I just try to take a peek at my reference always. How is the edge actually looking? It sort of softens towards the bottom especially, and then starts to crisp up right around here. We can just crisp it up a little bit so we have a little bit of variety as well in the edge. Regardless, we don't really want it razor sharp anyway, so I'm just sort of trying to keep that in mind. It's looking quite sharp right now. And this edge stuff is for rendering phase. We don't really need to do it right now. I just want to sort of think ahead and leave myself a little bit less work in each stage if I can. All right, so let's get back to this neck area. Just redefine this shadow area a little bit. Perhaps we lost a little bit of the turning tone as well. Just I think this is pretty easily remedied by just hatching some tone over here. And you know, we'll leave the finesse stuff for the rendering stage. Now, as you remember, I left intentionally this face area a little bit darker for a reason, and that is that now I can just go in with a pencil and darken this surrounding. Well, I'm sort of doing the big four modeling for this face, honestly. It's just darkening from the sides to create a sense of form, leaving a little bit of a light area for the middle. And these surrounding areas are quite dark, so let's just push the value a little bit so we can actually make a good distinction between those values there. That said, since we're treating this as shadow, we do want to keep things kind of subtle and soft. And thinking of the subject, you know, it's a young female model's cheek, so that's bound to be kind of soft in texture as well. So we want to keep the sensation that the transitions are very subtle. Perhaps we went a little bit far. We can always pull the value back a little bit, soften things a little bit. And as we know, we're gonna come back and refine things a little bit in the rendering stage. Maybe this hard eraser isn't really doing the trick. I feel sometimes when the paper is very saturated with the graphite, the hard eraser can sort of just glide along the surface instead of picking up any graphite. So let's just slightly pick our way to a lighter value along this edge here. I think this chin area went a little bit too far in value, so that's what I want to remedy. So it doesn't look like she has a beard. That would be pretty catastrophic. Perhaps we can slightly indicate the side plane of the nose. This is just so small that it's already very dot picky, just putting stuff in. Kind of like the fact that you can see a bit of her eyelashes also, so. Okay. I think that's looking all right. Maybe here we can clean out a little bit beyond the lines. If your eraser is looking very dirty from, you know, picking out at the shadows, maybe just clean it against your palm or something, so you don't introduce a lot of graphite and sort of shove it into the paper texture when you're actually trying to erase. Sometimes that can happen if you see that the point of this eraser is super dark. Okay, maybe this breast is pushing out a little bit much. Just push it back a little bit. All right, so I think we can add a little bit more to this hair area. We don't have to do much, but sort of turning this hair area over here, which is tied, kind of I guess the glossiness of the hair creates a very dark area over here, since it's not reflecting highlights back at us, so sort of appears very dark. I think to sort of remove the flatness from this hair a little bit, we can soften this edge a little bit and darken it slightly over on this side. In reality, I know it's a little bit on the flatter side. It's probably not a, you know, a cylinder of hair, but rather, you know, something like a curtain, you know, hanging there. So it's pretty flat as a shape, but we don't necessarily have to make it that way. can give it, you know, variety in any way we can. We're just putting some of these streaks over here. When you're doing lines, you maybe want to try to figure out if there is a thickness to the line, and also make sure the line isn't uniform all around, so it's not starting point, ending point, but rather it's, you know, you could fade one side of the line a little bit and have the other edge a little bit sharper if it's more defined. You could break it in some parts, sort of imply that it is going on. It's generally best not to, you know, make any straight sharp lines, because those sort of detract from the illusion of reality a little bit. As I'm speaking of this, I'm really trying to be careful not to accidentally put in any of that stuff. I feel like this area over here is where the hair strands sort of end, so the texture changes a little bit. So I think it gets overall a little bit darker because there's a lot of overlapping with the hair strands. And here I'm just trying to reinforce the difference between the hair and the shadow on her back a little bit more. I think this portion where it's against the background, we can sort of thin out a little bit towards the edge, so it's not so sharp. Sort of starts appearing more hair-like, as I previously stated. We want to keep things a little bit more vague and soft with the hair. We can have sharp areas, we don't mind that. Sometimes we see those things happening, but we want to avoid having a helmet head as well. We'll address these edges at the rendering stage. So looking at this breast, now that I just fixed it, I just made it a little bit, the top angle of the plane, it was a little bit off, so just nudged it a little bit. All right. Now we can look at this area. We see this glaring discrepancy between these values in the under the hand and the thigh here. So let's just darken this area entirely a little bit. We're not aiming to match this darkest dark value here, but we want to sort of have it feel more natural, to have it meld with the other values around it. I think it's time to sharpen the pencil again. I think this is sufficient in darkness, this value here. Let's just try to find the darkness for the other areas as well. We have this sort of reflected light, or it could be a halftone as well. We'll just sort of treat it as a reflected light at this point. So we need to darken this edge over here next to it. We want to make things soft. We don't maybe want to have it super obvious. We just want there to be an indication of it happening, so people know there is an extra form on there, which is the femoral muscles at the front, creating that sort of extra bump on the front side of the thigh. So, or rather maybe extra mass of muscle, so not really just a bump, it's far more than that. So perhaps here we can just also, seeing as we had to darken this and there's barely any edge between these values, we know then we have to darken the other shadow as well. So I don't know, perhaps I could have edited the photo a little bit, lift the shadows to create a little bit less contrast, more variety in the shadows perhaps, but I don't know. I feel this image serves us pretty well anyways. really try to see what's happening in this shadow, but I really don't see a lot happening, so we're not gonna put in a lot in that case, because yeah, hardly any point in inventing stuff. And it makes sense logically speaking as well. We know the light is coming from this direction. This thigh, you know, it's a vertical sort of side plane, and it usually catches not that much reflected light. Some, of course, which illuminates this whole area a little bit compared to, say, you know, something like the hair in shadow. Makes sense. If there was no reflected light, this would all be just black, just pure black in a vacuum, you know. So we know there is a little bit of reflected light, but it's not much. So let's just work a little bit on this edge here, as well as push the bedrock line slightly darker again. I feel like we always tend to lose a little bit of the darker value when we make the big form modeling. And occasionally too much, to the point of, you know, losing the big form in its entirety, and of course that's part of the challenges in working like this. I'll just go over here and rework the modeling a little bit so there's some kind of transition. Maybe a little bit too much as well. I'm just being a bit too carefree here. Just waving my pencil around and hoping good things happen. It's always a good idea to just stop and have a really good look before you do anything. Like here, I just managed to create this sharp, weird stuff going on in here. So just take a moment to address this stuff. Okay, I seem to be failing at fixing this, so let's just go with the stump and see if we can just fade it in there, because I just managed to create this sharp lines where I was trying to not do that. So even if you kind of know what you're doing, I guess I'm in that kind of knowing phase of my artistic career, you're still gonna have to go back and forth, you know, fix things, nudge them a little bit too much, then go back and fix it more, and this kind of stuff. All right, let's reinforce these lines a little bit. Let's also extend this one a little bit. Also, perhaps this is the point where we wanna fade it slightly to the form above it. You know, it's actually continuing that way, but that's the next phase. We will be putting in those planes. Okay, so here we probably can just reinforce this connection a little bit. It's not really a part of this phase, but we can darken this. Even though I said it, we don't want to make it super dark. We still want to have it, you know, appear as a shadow. But on the photograph, it's looking that dark, in the very darkest spot. I'm not gonna push it that much. I'm just gonna try to bring home the message that this is indeed a shadow and a crease, you know. Would also feel a bit unnatural to play that stuff down a little bit too much, where it's not looking like a crease of the depth it actually is, you know. So it looks a little bit weird currently since we don't have the glutes there. but perhaps it will make a bit more sense in a moment when we reach the next stage. The placement feels kind of alright, but I think I went a bit too much with this length of that line, so just bring it back a little bit. Quite a bit actually. It was more correct initially. I, for some reason, extended the line a little bit too much. All right, details, we don't need to be doing that yet. And what's more, there's pretty much this shadow over here that we could just refine a little bit. So this shadow is caused by, you know, the calf tricep muscle mass basically connecting into the Achilles tendon and connecting over there, so it makes sense that this shadow would be pointing towards that. So let's make it look like that as well. Again, we're making it a little bit too sharp. Perhaps we can toss in a little bit of that modeling. Then we can perhaps darken it quite a bit. We can redraw and darken this shadow area over here. Redefine this ankle transition. It's in places like this where I might like a dark outline because sort of emphasizes the form a little bit, where it's going away on the shadow side. That's where I could use just a dark outline as a kind of stylistic choice, where even when I'm not really seeing a shadow on this side anymore, you know, it has its places. So just a note there. Actually, I just noticed also we're lacking that little bit of the lateral malleol showing on the other side, so just put something in there. Should be legible as the malleol or the distal head of the fibula, however you want to put it. I'll just go in and toss this darker line over here as well. This on the shadow side, and I feel like it sometimes just sort of emphasizes the form a little bit. All right, then maybe we actually kind of skipped the hand there. Let's go and have a look at that as well. Before that, we want to really have a sharp pencil. So the ring finger here is feeling obviously a little bit too wide. Let's just bring it in a little bit. It's looking more in proportion. And we can perhaps look what's happening with that in relation to the little finger here. So it's actually casting a bit of a shadow onto the ring finger. So we're literally operating within an area that's, you know, as large as the tip of our pencil. So we're not really going to push the details too much in here. Just feels like we should get, you know, a microscope or something to work it through. Doesn't feel like there's much of a point there. Also probably not a great demonstration where I'm just sort of nibbling at the paper. Not very interested to look at. Perhaps a time lapse would be cool of that, but it's real-time demonstration, not so much. So this hand position also, I think I don't actually want to have the cast shadow on the ring finger, just gonna look a little bit too weird. So let's just have the ring finger a little bit more visible. Also, I made it a bit shorter for some reason. Again, it's a bit of a back and forth where we move things around. we're not operating within Photoshop, so we can't just undo. We have to, if we're a bit unsure what should be done, then just probably have to give it a go and see if it works or not. So sometimes things work a bit better and sometimes a little bit worse. Okay, perhaps let's just darken a little bit over here. Darken this area a little bit as well. This whole finger actually is a little bit darker, so let's just give it a bit of tone. And then we can start darkening this whole section. Okay, I've been staring at this image for an hour almost, well, 50 minutes now, so I should be taking a break instead of trying to fix things, because just the eye does get tired, and the eyes, that is, I don't look at this with only one eye, but yeah. Probably shouldn't be poking around too much with the hand, especially when I'm kind of starting to feel like my eyes won't focus. All right, let's take another look at this, and if it's looking all right, then let's move to the planes of light.